Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Buckle up, everyone. Buckle up. We're going to continue the sugya that we learned last night, beginning with the discussions of whether or not peiros are kikinyan or not. As we had mentioned that when a woman brings certain properties into a marriage, namely nichsei melug as opposed to nichsei tzon barzel. Nichsei melug is where a woman brings properties into a marriage, where she maintains the right to the principal, and the Baal maintains the right to the fruits, to the peiros. In contrast, nichsei tzon barzel is where she brings something into the marriage that functions more like a dowry, where she just gives it to him, and he basically keeps it. And what we've been discussing and what we saw was a machlokas Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish, was whether or not we say that peiros are kiguftami. Do we have an equivalence between the peiros and the principal, such that if she owns the principal, can she sell it in light of the fact that the peiros belong to him? Yes or no? That's the machlokas that we have between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish. So we're picking up about 3/4 of the way down, about, 15 to 20 lines before the bottom of the page on Pei Chesamid Beis. The Gemara says, thank you. Wow, subtle like a sledgehammer. The Gemara says, "V'anan hashta ben Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Rabbi Abba ben Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba uvein Rabbi Yehuda." The Gemara says, as a havamina, that at this point I would have thought potentially that Reb Shimon ben Lakish svir lahu, that we hold like the Shimon of Reb Shimon ben Lakish, that a son who sells an item, as mentioned yesterday in full detail, that he is able to have that kinyan take place even if the son dies before the father. But v'ka'amar Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, isal kadaitach kinyan peiros ki kinyan haguf dami. If in fact you're of the opinion that kinyan peiros is like kinyan haguf dami, then kimais abu maisya ben b'chay ha'ab. If the son dies in the lifetime of the father, amai isle lelokeach. No, kimais hav umais haben b'chay ha'ab. If the father dies, but the son died in the lifetime of the father, the Gemara does have an odd language here. You're correct about that. It was not written, the language is not smooth, but it does mean that the son died in the lifetime of the father. So then, amai isle lelokech, lemaisa, that son never took ownership of the item because the condition that would have fulfilled his ownership was the father's death, but his death preceded the father's death. Because of in high, when the child sold that which the mother gave him, lav dide kazavin, it wasn't even his to sell. Elalav, it must therefore be that the machlokas between Rav Yehuda and Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba was shma mina, the machlokas about kinyan peiros lav ke kinyan haguf dami, and that means that according to the shita that allows for the sale to take place, namely the shita Reb Shimon ben Lakish, that must be that kinyan peiros is lav ke kinyan guf haguf dami. So again, a machlokas showing its face again as to whether or not within the world of nichsei melug we have an inextricable relationship, an inseparable relationship between the peiros and the karen, or no? Do we say that the karen can be sold even though the peiros still have rights? And that machlokas is Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish respectively. So Adru Lakamed Rav Yehuda, after talking things over with Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, they brought it back to Rav Yehuda. Amar Lahu, he said, Hachi Amar Shmuel. Zu Einadoma Mishnah Senu. This case that we've been dealing with, where the son preceded the death of the father after selling that which he shouldn't have sold, which was the nichsei melug. So Shmuel says, you can't learn anything from there to our Mishnah. My timer. First of the very long lines on Pei Chesamid Beis, Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Bishlama, I could understand Yitani Ibcha if our Mishnah had discussed things in reverse order. Of Hakosev Nechasav Le'aviv, if a child were to have written as an inheritance for his untimely death toward his father, Ika Lemifshat Mina de Kinyan Peros Lav Ki Kinyan Haguftam. There, says the Gemara, I could have been able to understand that Kinyan HaPeros are not the same as Kinyan HaGuftami, no problem. Elahashta de Katani, the reverse, that HaKosev Nechasav Livno, Mishum de Ra'ili Yorshahu, that it's different because a child gets a Yerusha from a father, but a father doesn't get a Yerusha from a child. So perhaps, says the Gemara, this is the reason, Rav Yosef explains that perhaps this is the reason why our Mishnah is not comparable to the case of the son who died and had sold it right before he died. Amar le Abai. Abai says that's ridiculous, actually. He says that makes no sense. Why? Because Atu bara yaris Abba. We know that a son will inherit his father, but Abba lo yaris bira. If a son dies, who gets his money? The father. You want to call it a Yerusha, you can call it whatever you want. But Lamaisa, when all the chips fall, if the son dies, the father gets to pick up that Yerusha. These are shilas when Rahman.
If the son dies, children.
Correct. But these are shilas if the wife is involved, if there's kids, if the kids are katanim, if they're lekuchos. There's a lot of iterations of this. But the assumption of the Gemara, like you're all saying, is exactly correct, is that he was a single man. Ella says the Gemara must be le'avruchinhu lenichsei mibreka asi, that what we're talking about is where the son who sold the nichsei melug, where he's trying to avoid giving it to his own children. That's a little bit not so geschmack. So hachanami, in our case, maybe we should say the same thing. That hachanami la'avruchinhu lenichsei me achva asi, that he's trying to get it away from other people in his family, from his brothers. So therefore, this difference that Rabbi Yosef wanted to say in the name of Shmuel between our case and the Mishnah, that really isn't a difference. So the Gemara tries again. Elamai eino doma la Mishnah. The Mishnah saying, what does it mean? It means that the difference between our case and the case of the Mishnah is mishum takanos usha. This is something that we learned about a while ago. We learned about it in Ksubis in a couple of places. What is takanos usha? The Gemara says 3 lines from the bottom. The Amar of Yosei bar Chanina. Be'usha hiskinu ha'isha shemachra b'nichsei melug b'chai baila umesa. If a woman sells that which she brought into the marriage, but that thing the husband has access to peiros, so then b'chai baila umesa habal motzi miyad halakuchos. So then the din is that the husband, if she sells it, the husband can always go to the person that she sold to and say, sorry, buddy, my wife sold that which is mine. That is takanas usha. Takanas usha, again, is that if a woman sells her nichsei melug and then she dies, then the husband has the right to go to the people to whom she sold this item, this nichsei melug, and collect it.
Even if he didn't do it when she was alive, the time lapse.
What do you mean? No, we're talking about where she sold it, not where he sold it.
Right, she sold it.
She sold it and then she died. She sold it and then he died. The sale's final. What? So she sells it. She sells it, let's say, on January 1st, and she dies on January 3rd. So on January 4th, the husband can go to the lekuchos to whom she sold the nichsei melug and just collect them. That's takanas usha.
On January 2nd?
No. Nothing. And only until she dies. Mm-mm. That's takanas usha. In a regular normal bezdin, if that were to have happened, yes, but takanas usha was an override. And the Meforshim here explained that the reason why the Chachamim overrode the normal rule was because of Ava. We didn't want to have a scenario of bad husband-wife politics. And if they were, for the duration of the time that she was married before she died, that marriage is on the rocks because she sold the nichsei melug. It's kind of like selling your diamond ring, like you're selling the thing that you brought to the marriage. It's iconic, and if you do that, it's bad for the marriage. So takanas usha was kind of like let's call it a shalom bayis intervention of sorts, whatever. This was before couples therapy. I just tried to get a couple into couples therapy. They called me for advice. I sent them to couples therapy. Everyone is full. Everyone is full. So we have what to work on. Anyways, on to happier, more complex news. Amar of Idi bar Avin, Afana Nami Tanina. We actually have this idea already listed in a Mishnah. Last line of Peiches and Beis, Me'idim anu be'ish ploni. Let's say that there were witnesses. We'll soon see that these witnesses were Eidim Zomimim. But what was the testimony that they gave? Me'idim anu be'ish ploni, shegirish es ishto v'nasan ksuvasa. That a man divorced his wife and paid the ksuba. Okay. And v'harehi tachtav u'mishamashto, and they were married, and now they're not married. V'nimtzu zomimim. So what were they trying to do? They were trying to say she shouldn't collect the ksuba, and they lied. Halacha is ein omrim yishalman kol ksubasa. We would not say that she needs to get paid her whole ksuba, even though it seems that that's what they were striving to do. Ella, says the Gemara, only tovas hanoas ksubasa, only the tovas hana of the ksuba. And what is the tovas hana of the ksuba that the Eidim Zomamin would have to pay? Eizehu tovas hanoas ksubasa, says the Gemara, the way we measure the tovas hana, which is a small amount of money, is omdin kama adam rotza litain b'ksuba shelzu. How much would a man pay a woman for her ksuba, she'im nis armela o nis garsha, so that in the event that the ksuba ever needs to be collected, he keeps it. So let's say she says, look, my ksuba is worth 200 zuz. You can buy it for me today for 50, right? She's hedging. She just needs the money. So because she needs the money, she's willing to sell her 200 zuz ksuba for less. Okay, sometimes that happens. We make decisions like it's called taking a loan. We do this all the time, where we buy money at a ridiculous rate. We do the credit cards, same thing. We spend money and we say, I'll spend $100 today, even though in aggregate over time, if I hold it on my credit card, I'll pay 24% a year. I'll pay 124% on the $100 by the end of the year. Or she really needed the money right now. Whichever. Labdafka. Right. She profits. She profits. Well, nothing changes for her, because for her, she gets her 50 and she'll never get the 200. Live or die, meaning at the end of the day, all she's getting is 50. So she made that transaction today because she had a loan shark.
That's the opposite scenario. She would.
But that was the decision, was to pay, was to sell for 50 and she's hedging. Yeah. What? So that's what the Gemara says is called tovas hana. And remember, the guy who buys the ksuba, his one aspiration is that she should get divorced, because that's when he can go and effectuate what this document is. If she dies,
the buyer is doing good.
Right. He prayed for the guy also.
Yep.
oh, right, correct. Yeah, this is not a good scenario, basically. I mean, it's good for almost nobody. Again, there's a gamble on the buyer. She gave up 150. Again, I'm making up the numbers, but she gave up 150 of her ksuba. Okay, so this is called tovas hana, and the Eidim Zomamin would have to pay this. V'im mesa, if she were to have died, yirashena baila, her husband would have been yoresh. What would he have been yoresh? The 50. He would have been yoresh the tovas hana, not the ksuba. The ksuba was sold. Okay. V'isal kadaitach leisa letakanas usha. If you want to say that there is no takanas usha, namely that she's allowed to keep the money, amayi rashena baila. Why would the husband inherit the money? Tazbin ksuva salagamre. She could have just sold her ksuba outright. Why would she have gone through all of this complexity? So Amar Abaye, don't say that, because im amru b'nichsei melug, yomru b'nichsei tzon barzel. He wriggles out of the answer by saying maybe this case isn't talking about nichsei melug like we were talking about, but rather is talking about a case of nichsei tzon barzel, which are not the same. And now the Gemara jumps into a very nuanced and complex conversation about tovas hana. Amar Abaye, on Pei Tes Amud Aleph, about a quarter of the way down, a little bit less. Amar Abaye, tovas hana, hol ve'asal yadan, name a milsa. Why don't we have a shmooze about tovas hana? If it were me, I would have chosen another conversation, but Abaye felt that this was an appropriate conversation. Tovas hana le'isha havya. When there is a case of tovas hana, that money remains the property of the wife. So let's say the woman had a loan shark out against her. She had a 200 zuz ksuba and she needed to get $50 today, and she had no money to her name. So she sells her ksuba for tovas hana. Again, the number we're using is that it's 50 zuz against the 200. So she's hedging that she's not hedging, she's trading, he's hedging. So she says, I'll take the 50. The isalka daitach lebal havya. If you want to say, if we might have thought perhaps that the tovas hana money does go to the Baal, lemru la edim, the edim zomamin could have say, my afsedinach, what loss did I cause for you? If the tovas hana were to have gone to somebody else, if it were to have gone to the husband, ihavas mizavnas la l'tovas hana bal habashakil minach. So maybe in the case of Edim Zomamin at the top of the page that we saw, where we said that they should only pay the Tovas Hana, maybe the Edim Zomamin shouldn't even pay the Tovas Hana if that Tovas Hana anyways goes to the Baal. So therefore it must be that it doesn't go to the Baal. And says the Gemara, Omar Rav Shalman, Mishum de'ika revach besa. They said that's not a very good argument, because even if it's true that she doesn't get to keep those dollars, those 50 zuz, but 50 zuz is that's a real, you're flush with cash now. That's bank. That's a lot of money. What's a get $10,000 in mod? I don't know exactly what the numbers are. It's a lot of money. This is $2,500, and that's revach besa. Now you have a little bit more spending money in the house, and afalpi that the money really isn't hers per se, but there's still revach besa. Spending at home is a little bit easier this month, and that's considered to be beneficial to her. So that's why the Edim Zomamin would have to pay the Tovas Hana, even in a case where the husband were to have been the one to take all of her money. Amar Rava Hilchasa Tovas Hana leisha ve'ein habal ochel peros. That when it comes to Tovas Hana, if a woman sells her ksuva for pennies on the dollar, the halacha is that the woman keeps it, and the husband gets no peros, meaning we don't require her to take this money, plant a tree or something that actually has, growing peros. She doesn't have to invest it in stocks that has peros. Nothing. It's her money. It's her money. My taima, because pira takinu le rabbanon, the rabbis only said that the peros of nichsei melug belong to the husband, but pira de pira, but the secondary derivatives, which is our case over here, which is tovas hana, that is lo takinu le rabbanon. We're talking about when she sells her ksuba for tovas hana. But the Chachamim first instituted a ksuba for her protection. So now, when you look at tovas hana, you have the ksuba, which was takanas Chachamim for her, and then the tovas hana is a derivative of the takanas. It's pira de pira. So the Gemara says it's not the same as nichsei melug. Nichsei melug is a halachic construct where whatever she brings to, not whatever, but what she brings in this particular case, she buys an orchard, she brings an orchard, her dad gifts it to her when she gets married. The orchard's worth $1 million and it produces $10 million of fruit. He gets to keep all the fruit and all the proceeds she keeps. So that's a fundamental din of nichsei melug. But here the ksuba is pira and the tovas hana is pira de pira. So what does he get to keep? Only pira. But when it comes to tovas hana, he has no rights. That's how Rava paskins, and that is quoted in the Rambam this way and in Shulchan Aruch. Ki asa Rav Papa v'Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua be Rav. When these two Amoraim came from Rav, Amre, they said, Tanina l'takanas usha. We learned a din about takanas usha. Where did we learn it? We learned it in our Mishnah that we learned on Pei Zayin Amud Aleph. Ha'eved v'ha'isha pigi asan ra. We had learned then that a slave and a woman engaging with them can lead to bad things because hachovel bahen chayev. If I were to injure an eved or an isha, I'd have to pay. V'heim shechavlu ba'acherim turib. However, if they were to injure me, an eved or an isha, they're patur because they have no money. Now, isal kadaitach, if you want to say that leisa letakanas usha, if you want to say that there isn't takanas usha, namely that she does keep money for herself, tazben nichsei melug v'titenle, then she should have to cash out her nichsei melug to pay me for the damages. Why does our Mishnah say that eved v'isha pigi yasan ra if she has nichsei melug? It must be that the nichsei melug are not hers. It must be that takanas usha is correct, that we had to give over in full, again, whatever that means, because it's not really in full, but we had to make sure that the husband held on to these properties. Otherwise, she would have had money to her name, and it wouldn't be pigi yasan ra. Pigi yasan ra assumes that she has no money. But if there's no takanas usha, then she does have money, and she would have to cash out elements of her nichsei melug. Says the Gemara, wait. According to you, maybe we can say you're right, that there is takanas usha, and she's not able to sell the nichsei melug in a classical way. But Taz ben nichsei melug b'tovas hana v'titen le. Maybe she should forego her tovas hana and give the tova. She should forego her nichsei melug. She can't use that, but she should get the tovas hana of her ksuba and pay the damages. So what we're seeing from here, from the Gemara, is a beautiful question. Our Mishnah on Pei Zayin Amud Aleph says that Eved v'Isha Pigiyasanra, that when it comes to an Eved and an Isha, you should not get involved, because if you hurt a woman, you have to pay her. If she hurts you, she doesn't have to pay you. So says the Gemara, must be that there's Takanas Usha. Says the Gemara, fine, there's Takanas Usha. You can't use your nichsei melug. But why aren't you cashing out the Tovas Hana for your ksuba to pay your damages? You can't just not pay me. And the Mishnah says it's Pigiyas Ra, which means that she doesn't have an obligation to cash out her ksuba for Tovas Hana in order to pay for the damages. Ela de Leisla, it must be that there was nothing left over. Hachanami de Leisla, we would have to say the same over here. Says the Gemara, forget the Tovas Hana, but Tazbin Ksuvasa, but Tovas Hana v'titein la. Similar question. Says the Gemara, Hamani, why can't you do that with the ksuba? Reb Meir he. A man should not be alone with his wife. He should not wait any time with his wife at all, even shah achas below ksuba. The poskim are makbid on this, that couples should not have tashmish hamita if they don't know where their ksuba is, as a protective measure for the wife, that she should not be easily discarded in her marriage without getting paid the ksuba. This comes up semi-frequently, where people have no idea where their ksuba is. They've moved 10 times, whatever, floods, v'chule, just disorganized. So those people should have their ksuba rewritten with new edim. These things do come up. A couple should not be mishamish mitasam without having their ksuba available to them. The time of Mai, 8 lines, 7 lines from the bottom. This is because kadeshalo tehe kala be'einav lehotzia. So says the Gemara, what are you talking about? You can't get rid of a ksuba because that is for her protection. Says the Gemara, you're right. But hacha lo megareshla. In this case, where she cashes out the ksuba as tovas hana for pennies on the dollar to pay for damages, this is not a concern, because the I megareshla, even if he would divorce her, asu hanach dezavne gavu la l'chsuvasa minei. Remember, what's going to happen is that if they get divorced, she sold the ksuba to another person. That other person is going to come to him and collect the money. So in this case, there's no reason. The ksuba already is working its magic, because if he does divorce her, the concern was that if she sold the ksuba, it would have no effect in protecting her. That's not true, because the husband still has to pay out, not to her, but he has to pay out to the lokuchos who bought her ksuba b'tovas hana. So let's say they paid 50. And all of a sudden in the paper, they see in the single section that this woman is now single again, recently divorced. Givaldik, they take the document of the ksuba that they bought for pennies on the dollar. They won their gamble, they hedged, and they're going to go cash out. So the Gemara says, maybe a woman really should sell her ksuba for pennies on the dollar, b'tovas hana, in order to pay off the people that she hurt. And therefore our Mishnah on Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, which says Pigiyas Ra, wouldn't be correct. Ella says that.
Talk about her son too. She actually gives it to her.
What?
She actually gives the ksuba to the buyer before getting divorced. As a.
It's like giving over a shtar chov. Yeah, it's like giving over a shtar chov to the lekuchos. They're hedging too. What?
I thought you were like, wait, a different star or something saying.
Oh, I don't think they repurposed. They could rewrite it. I don't know that the Gemara doesn't discuss that. I don't think they do that. I think it's just it just functions as a shtar chov. You know, Rachel was married to Shimon. It kind of functions as a shtar chov. So therefore, the Gemara says that Tovas Hana is different. Tovas Hana is still Pigiyas Ra and Pei Zayin. Why is it Pigiyas Ra for Nish? Because Tovas Hana is Mili Ninhu. It's just words. Very odd. Why is it just words? Umili lo mishtavde. And you can't have a chov, you can't have a set of obligations from words alone. Asks the Gemara, alam alo, why not? This is not just words. Mili de mizdavne bidinore. Yes, you're right, there are words that transacted, but those words could lead to actual money. So what are you talking about that tovas hana is words? Ella, you're right. The reason why a woman is still Pigiyas Ra is because of the following. The reason why she doesn't have to sell her ksuba is mishum de Shmuel. The Amar Shmuel. Shmuel says 4 lines from the bottom on Pei Tes Amud Aleph. I hope to get close to the bottom of Pei Tes Amud Beis. Hamocher shtar chov lechavero. Let's say that I have a shtar chov that you owe me $1,000. Let's say Rabbi Yaakov over here owes me $1,000, and I sell it to Stan. So Stan can now collect. And Stan wanted, I needed a little bit of cash. I sold it to Stan for $900 because I needed cash today, but I couldn't collect from Rabbi Yaakov for a week, but I needed the cash. It was worth a $100 loss for me. So mocher shtar chov lechavero, v'chazar v'mochlo, and then there was mechila on the shtar, machul. Again, Stan's already, but he's bugged. He's the same thing. The afilu yoresh mochel. Even the next generation, there's also mechila. So what do we see from over here? What do we see from over here? That maybe if she were to have sold the ksuba, she would have been mochelas, and her husband would have had nothing. There would have been no ksuba anymore. So that's why we wouldn't allow for a woman to sell her ksuba even betovas hana, because if she's mochelas, there's nothing protecting her anymore in her marriage. And then she can rather flippantly, and these things don't happen nowadays this way. Most people, when husbands and wives fight and there's a divorce, like it doesn't hinge upon the ksuba as much as it did back in the day. But our marriages are different. I don't want to say the marriages then were more flippant, but divorces were easier than they are now. Now you're talking about dividing property and cars and houses and assets and chule and alimony. Very complicated nowadays. So Amre, the Gemara says, Zvune zavin v'titein le. So she should sell it and then give it to him. V'imachla le legabe bal timchala. So she should sell it to the husband, and if there's mechila, then she's doing the mechila directly with her husband. But one thing that was a benefit is that she got to pay the person who she hurt. So again, if in fact she sold her ksuba to her husband, b'tovas hana. Husband is like $50 today or $200, and after our marriage falls apart, he's like, all right. She takes those $50 and pays for the damages to the guy that she knocked out a tooth a couple days ago when she was down the street. So maybe that should work. Says the Gemara, Amre, Kol legabe bal vaday machlale, v'afsidine le'ahuz vina bi'adayim lo afsidin. We're not going to get involved with that because she will definitely be mochel ksuba in such a case, and therefore the husband will lose out on that ksuba. And there's no way she's not going to be mochelas because they don't like each other. So she'll just be mochelas, and she's just like, leave me be, I'm out of here. And the chitema is vina nehale le'ahu dechavla be'betovasana. Perhaps we should say that she's going to be mochelas. Sorry, not the right word. Perhaps we should say that she'll sell her ksuba betovasana to the person who she harmed directly. So this is a great move. So she goes to the guy. So let's say Rachel and Reuven got in a fist fight, and she happens to be very good at jujitsu, and she just tore him to shreds, and she owed him 50 zuz. And then when time comes, she goes to Bezdin. Bezdin says, Rachel, you owe Reuven 50 zuz. She says, look, I don't have any cash, but I'm willing to sell you b'tovas hana. I'm willing to sell you my ksuba for 50 zuz, even Stephen. Now, let's just do all the math. The guy who got hurt got exactly what he deserved, which was 50, with the possible chance, with an upside, with the possible chance of collecting on the ksuba. The husband, if ever they get divorced, will have to pay that money to the man that was hurt. Rachel basically is still safe in her marriage because the ksuba will have to be paid one way or the other, which means that the kunz of the ksuba that it should hold on to her and protect her is still in place. Win-win-win. Good solution. So that's what we were saying over here, because on the top of Peites Amud Beis, the Gemara continues, the imachla legabe baal lo kamafsid, dehashtanami lo midi kayavale. Let's figure this piece out. The imachla legabe baal. If she wanted to be mocheles legabe baal lo kamafsid, or her mechila is irrelevant. She's not the holder of the ksuba anymore. She can't be mocheles. It's not her star anymore. She gave it over to the guy that she punched in the face. Dashtanami lo midi kayavale. There's nothing transacting between the two of them, the husband and wife. Says the Gemara, so kol legabe baal vaday machla ve'atruche beidin bechdi lo matrachinan. The Gemara says, nevertheless, there is still some power for her to be mocheles and to say, I no longer want a ksuba. in which case that would mess up the whole system. So then the Gemara goes and talks about another brisa over here. What were we just discussing? We were trying to figure out why it is that a woman should not use her ksuba to pay the Baal. And then we spoke about the din of Shmuel, of Shtarcho, where we were concerned about Mechila. And the concern seems to still be there. And therefore, because of the concern of Mechila, Shmuel says, she should not sell her ksuba or the tova sana of her ksuba to pay off the guy that she hurt. And therefore, pigi yasan ra, which is really what we're trying to establish. That's the deepest part of our Gemara, although it's not really mentioned too much in the flow of our Gemara. So then let's keep going in our discussion. We're going to stop about 10 lines or so from the bottom of the page, maybe 12 lines, where it says Lema Takanas Usha Tanaihi. But in the meantime, let's spend a few more minutes together and learn the rest of this sugya. Elahadatanya, what about the rest of the brisa? This is actually a tosefta in the next parak. V'chein hi shechavla bebaila. Uh-oh, now we have some domestic abuse issues. The Ruvain was her husband in this case, and she gave an elbow to the jaw. So says the Gemara, lo hifsida ksuvasa. She doesn't learn her ksuba, lose her ksuba. Amai, why not? Tizvenina nehale lechsuvasa lebaila betovasana behachavla. She should sell her ksuba to her husband betovasana. It's 50 cents on the, let's say 25 cents on the dollar. Di machla legabe baal lekapseda, because that way, even if she is mocheles on the ksuba, at least he still made $50 zuz. Says the Gemara, ha vadai Rav Meir. This part of the brisa, the tosefta that we just read, that said v'chein hi shechavla bebaila, that is definitely the shita of Rav Meir. To Amar, he holds asr la'atam sheyishes ishto afilu sha'achas below ksuba, because as mentioned, Rav Meir was of the opinion that we can't do this because she should never be mocheles on the ksuba. It's not safe for her to do that. You're right. You check the box that he doesn't lose out entirely because he, again, made his 25 cents on the dollar. But Lamai says she can still be mocheles on her ksuba, which means that her marriage is not protected. And therefore, again, a woman should not do this. And that, again, leaves her in the category of Isha, Pigi Yasan Ra. Says the Gemara. In which case? Yeah. Not to be morbid or anything, but we see this victim profile all the time where women who are beaten in their marriages stay in their marriage. We see it a lot. It's not an uncommon phenomenon. Oh, I'm so sorry. Who's apologizing to at this point? Like it's very complicated, these kinds of cases. Says the Gemara, that was the din of Rav Meir, and we had said that the reason why was because shelo tehei kala pe'einav lahotzia. We don't want it to be easy for the husband to divorce the wife. Says the Gemara, but hacha megaresh la v'gavile b'chavale mina. But he should divorce her, and then now she'll have cash. And now that she has cash, he should collect it from her. Because
he's paying off with his own money.
He owed it anyways. He owed the ksuba. They were getting divorced anyways. So that money is, like when you write a check, even though it hasn't cleared in the bank, but you spent it already, same thing. This marriage is over. He owes her 200 zuz. So he's just playing his cards. It's like, look, I'm down 200 zuz. I may as well get 50 zuz back. So he says, sweetheart, it's been great. I hate you. We're getting divorced. They go to Bezdin. They write a get. Everything ends. He writes her a check for $10,000. And then she has to write back a check for $2,500 for the damages, whatever the damage costs. We skip the next line, according to some of the Meforshim, and we pick up with Kigon about a quarter of the way down on Peitassim and Beis. What was the case over here? Kigon de nafish ksuvasa, where she had a little bit of a larger ksuba than standard. Demishumahu porta, that for that amount of money that's left over, lo mafsid tuva, there isn't too much that's going to be lost. Vi denefisha ksuvasa miksuva deoraisa, and if her ksuva is larger than the minimal 100 of a ksuva, then nukma aksuva deoraisa, we let her keep the base 100 of the ksuba. V'idach tizbena nehale bechabale, that she should sell that and basically pay him with the money that's above the minimal amount of the ksuba. Says the Gemara, that actually isn't the case. Rather, 1/3 of the way down, really the case was that her her ksuba was 100. We say this, that we add another 100 that the husband added min dilan, that he adds from his own. That's how we do our ksubas now. And what was our case? Dahave chable arba zuze. She hurt him with a damage of 4 zuz, which leaves over, which basically, so that's 4 zuz. And demishum arba zuze lo mafsid esrim v'chamisha. He's not going to pay down 25 sela, which is 100 zuz. They're speaking in a way that they assume we know their currency. We would say 4 quarters is $1 very quickly. They would say 25 sela is 100 zuz. If he got damaged with a small injury of 4 zuz, he's not going to divorce her, pay 100 zuz, and then recollect 4. That is a fiscally irresponsible decision. Ella, so therefore, again, she remains in the case of Pigiyah Sanra. And the Gemara halfway down deals with one more brisa before we get to the end of the day. Ella Hadatanya, we have another part of this brisa. And this brisa is the same one that we saw v'chein, a little bit above. And the brisa says, "Kishem shelo timkor v'hi tachtav, kach lo tafsid v'hi tachtav." So the Gemara says that just like she should not sell her ksuba, also she should not lose out on her ksuba. What does this mean? Sometimes she does lose out. What would be a case where she would lose out on some of her ksuba dollars? The Gemara says, "Kigon denefisha ksubasa miksuba doraisa." If the husband gave her more than the minimal 100, let's say he gave her 500, so the minimum is 100 and the full is 500. And in such a case, that yes, she would get to keep the base of 100, but if she injured him, she'd have to lose some of that extra money that was in the ksuba. Amar Rava, Seifa, that last case that we just learned of Kishem Shelo Timkor, that case is Asa and Ksubas Benin Dichrin. That's talking about a different case. It's talking about a case of Ksubas Benin Dichrin. This is something that we learned about a while ago. This is where a man is married to 2 different women, each of them having a different amount of money in their ksuba, and then the man dies. So the halacha is that ksubas benin dichrin means that these ksuba dollars go directly to the sons. It's not Yerusha. It's not Yerusha. It's not divvied up the same way. So the dugma, if there were brothers, we would say 2xxx, oldest, younger. We don't do that here. This money is just given to the sons, not in any, ratioed kind of way because of bechor and non-bechor. Really, this is what's happening. Lo hifsid ksubas benin dichrin, that we assume that there is no loss to the sons in this case. My timer, why would this be true? Because zuzehuda ansuha, the only reason why her ksuba was structured this way was because she needed money. She was forced into selling her ksuba. Kach mocheres ksubas lebayla lo hifsid ksubas benin dichrin. And anytime a woman is forced to sell her ksuba, let's say in this case she has to pay off someone who got injured, whatever the case may be. So there, the benin dichrin don't lose out. My timer, because zuze hu de ansua, she was forced to sell those zuz. We're not done with this sugya, but we're going to stop here and pick up tomorrow with a discussion more about Takana Susha, about 12 lines from the bottom of the page. Wishing you all a beautiful night.